Welcome to Millennium Counseling Center's podcast, where each week we go in depth into all things mental health, addiction recovery, and being our healthiest and happiest self. Enjoy. Okay, Derek, well, it's the end of the summer, and that means back to school for a bunch of kids. And one of the things that we've seen in the news and from clients that are parents is how schools are navigating phone, watch, technology use while in the school. And a lot of different policies, a lot of different ways that the schools and school systems are kind of trying to figure out something new, something different. So what are you hearing and what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that it's a hot topic of conversation is how technology and social media is affecting younger people and their mental health. And I think that's becoming a bigger and bigger realization and subject. And now we have parents and school systems that are trying to figure out a way to properly manage that and to try to help with that thing. I think that it's absolutely something that we see in the world that we live in, where these things are affecting kids and adults. But I love the idea that people are thinking about this and trying to actually address the problem and figure out solutions for it and looking at the different ways to do that. And I've heard a wide array of different policies and how people are looking at that. But overall, I'm glad to see this. I think they're moving in the right direction. I think it's something that's necessary. And it's just a matter of, how they do that and how they support that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that some of this, or a lot of it, is spawned on by a book that came out earlier this summer called The Anxious Generation, where the author really kind of dove into the research and the data around how phones, tablets, technology, social media is impacting elementary school, middle school, high school kids. And I think that a lot of schools are reading that and kind of paying a lot of credence to it and being like, hey, we have to pay attention to the data because these kids are with us every day and we want the best for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the pushback on that historically has been that the interactions that people have, that they're still interacting socially with each other and they're just doing it in a different way through video games or through texting or through social media. And I think that that's true, that there is an aspect of that. But I think that what we do see is that, and the adults aren't the best example of this, but people are more often buried in their phones or their computers or their watches or whatever that is. And so the kids are not only learning to do this, but they're seeing it at all levels. So they're seeing it from, the rest of the community. And I think that, what we know is that does affect their socialization, how they interact with each other and how you have face-to-face conversations and even what you're concentrating on and what you're looking at, which on technologies is usually a more extreme version of whatever's happening in life, because it's particularly social media is like a highlight reel of other lives. And certainly it can, affect people's self-esteem and especially kids as far as they're looking around and they see that every one of their friends is in Bora Bora, or at least they think they are. And nobody has to just go outside and play with a stick for 3 hours like they did at one point.
Totally. Well, and I guess as a parent myself, I really want my kids to learn both. I want them to learn how to use technology because where they're going, they're going to need to know that, maybe the terminology is, a digital native, right? They're growing up with technology, which is great. And I also want them to learn, human to human interaction, right? Where there's not a phone in your hand while you're talking, right? Or there's not, you're 5 feet away from somebody and you're communicating through a different medium. So yeah, for me, I want both. And I think that, for the schools to come out and say, hey, maybe we want when you're here to really focus on the person to person, right? Because outside of here, you can incorporate technology as much as you want. But when you're here, here's how we want to influence you.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, one of the things that I've seen quite a bit of is that this happens with couples, it happens with kids to parents, is they're having a lot of these kind of really important, serious conversations over text. And they're trying to address important aspects of parenting, of partnerships, of all of those things. And they're doing it over text messaging. And I think that communicating that way can be an effective way to exchange information. But, my personal belief is that if you're trying to navigate through something that can be tricky or even complicated, that to do that over text, literally with someone else who's in the same house as you, is there's a lot lost in translation through texting without being able to see people's facial expressions and their tone and those types of things. That makes that more difficult. And I think that if that's what the kids are seeing and that's what they're relying on as a way to work through some of these things, then ultimately I think that puts them at a disadvantage as they grow up, and both on learning how to do that. But to your point, I think technology is a positive thing, and I think they need to learn how to do it. But I think we just need to find the balance. And I think that's what a lot of these schools are doing, is they're trying to balance that out a little bit. I think we've been heavy on the technology side, and they're trying to push back a little bit more towards the face-to-face, and which I think is a really good thing.
Yeah. Well, and I can't imagine what it's like to be that age right now, school age kid now, and then being told, after however many years you're used to it one way, now it's going to go the other way, right? So you're 12 or you're 15 and you're walking into school this week, next week, and you're being told, hey, give us all your stuff, right? We're going to put it in this bag or put it in your locker or whatever, don't bring it to school, whatever it is. And, now you got to figure out this external authority figure telling you can't do something that you're kind of used to already. And so I think that's going to be a big adjustment. And for parents who, they're going to have to get involved on some level of talking to their kids about where this is coming from and maybe even kind of why it's important. But also on the emotional side, kind of how to support their emotions with this change.
You're exactly right. Anytime you have some big shift in change, we've talked about that in other conversations about how change affects us. And I think that you're right, though. I think the way that they can do this well is if they have kind of consistent messaging from their teachers and their educators, and also the parents, who also, that may be an adjustment. They're used to being connected to their kids, kind of continuously, whether it's a text in between classes or updating them with information. And I think that that'll be an adjustment for the parents as well. And my hope is that the parents will support this, because I think overall, just from a big picture standpoint, I think it will be helpful for everybody. I think it's something that's necessary. And, my hope to the parents out there is that they're going to support the educators in this and the folks who believe this is a good idea, because I think overall it is something that will be helpful and is necessary as we continue to see we're moving, even with AI and these new technologies that are coming out, we're moving more towards that. And I think if we don't start creating some self-imposed changes in that, then it would be very easy to slide into that in totality, which I think would be detrimental for everyone.
Well, and one of the ways that I'm trying to kind of take this on is that maybe there is a part of your day where kind of constantly checking your devices is not a good idea. And so, sure, for a developing brain that's in a school to learn not just academically, but socially and other things, like, for me, it's also like, well, maybe there's things outside of that setting where self-imposed technology limits is probably a good idea. Our school system, where our family is, kind of instituted something a few years called screen break. And when you're in the home, just have devices off, right? And that was just an interesting kind of start to this idea of how to be more intentional around your use of technology and screens. And yeah, I think this shouldn't just be about like creating and implementing changes for kids. I think this hopefully spills into the home and adults just in general, of how we're managing our screen time, and maybe kind of even thinking of what are times in our day where it's not best for me to have it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the accessibility of it is where a big part of that adjustment comes in. I know, even in myself personally, of wanting to be accessible to people and seeing the value and the importance of that, but also wanting to be accessible to my family and to, the people that we're close to. If people feel like you are always distracted by something else, mainly, your phone or those things, then I think that it makes it more difficult to connect with them. And I think that there's value in, kind of removing that and being able to have just some time when you're not necessarily addressing some specific thing, but you're just kind of hanging out with people. And that's many times where like really interesting conversations and connection can grow. So I agree with you. I think at all levels, it's something that we need to look at and continue to look at to make sure, particularly for as the kids are coming up, as I said before, as they're growing up, they see what we do as parents and they follow after that. And so if we want them to be able to learn things in a healthy way, then we also need to be able to do those things in a healthy way.
Well, and I guess one kind of tangential thought I've had around this is each generation or every couple of years, there's a new thing that the parents want to curb their kids from doing, right? It's drinking or smoking or vaping or gaming or, and now it's technology, right? And it's kind of almost a rite of passage, right? To be a kid and have the older generation or parents or the authority be like, this is bad for you, right? And I kind of piggybacking on what I was saying earlier, I just think it's important for us not to just view this as a quote unquote kind of change or shift for the kids, but also for us. It's kind of like at some point in time, we got to look at our own relationship with it if we really want to see kind of significant changes in how our kids are doing it.
Yeah, and you're somebody with 3 young kids and you're around a lot of other families with kids the same ages or, as they're growing up. I mean, what do you see as far as how that engagement looks from affected by technology as far as how the kids interact with each other and how they play with each other and, how they're doing with that from what you see because you're around it quite a bit. What do you see as far as how that looks and how that's affecting them positively and negatively?
Yeah. Well, for us, the main device that our kids have is a smartwatch. So it's really allowed for some autonomy with kind of going to friends' houses or going places and being able to check in. And I think that's been really helpful to know, like, I can be in touch with them and they can be gone and give them that freedom. And I think kind of where that's kind of gone sideways is it's like the newest, the best, the brightest thing. It's like, oh, when am I going to get this or when am I going to get that? And then it's hard when their peers have phones or other things. And it's like, well, we're not there yet. Right. So, having differences in what their peers are allowed to have or how they're figuring it out versus us. I mean, I think that's always hard, right? When you're trying to tell a kid, hey, here's our rules when you see other kids kind of operating within a different way.
Yeah, I think that's all accurate. I coach high school soccer, and over the years, we've had several instances where we have had a player during a game on a phone call. We look over and somebody has come out of the game and they're kind of on the bench. And, one of our coaches noticed that they're chatting on the phone about something. And I obviously understand that in an emergency situation, but I think just being able to stay engaged in whatever it is you're doing, to be able to just be totally locked in on that and be a part of that is really important. And it's important for athletics. It's important for club activities. And, going back to how we started on this, I think it's super important for learning and really important for kids in schools. And to be able to just, even if they may not be totally interested in the subject or even in how that's being presented to them, just the ability to stay focused on one thing. We notice so much with people these days around distraction. And I think part of that is that we are distracted by this kind of constant influx of information or communication or videos or whatever people are watching. And I think just learning how to limit that is going to be important for all of us across the board. So I'm glad that the schools are looking at this. I'm glad the educators are trying to address this. And my hope is that as adults, we are going to continue to support that and make sure that we're also being good examples of that.